Welcome back to LaxRatsTV. This is State of Lax, episode 3. Last weekend was the All-Star game, which was fun, but it's nice to get back to week 7, get back to some real PLL matchups, and watch some good lacrosse. So today we're gonna talk about playoff predictions. We're gonna talk about week 7 predictions for this upcoming week in Chicago, and then Paul Rabil and Paul Carcaterra sat down, did a State of the League like they often do this past week, and they gave us some good stuff to talk about there, some exciting things about the future of lacrosse and the future of the PLL. So let's get right into it. We'll start with our playoff predictions. So obviously the playoff format this year, there's 4 teams in each conference, and 1 team is going to be left out of each conference, the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. Initial thoughts are the Eastern Conference is kind of a shit show, honestly. You've got 4 teams that their ceiling is literally winning a championship. So, that ceiling might be more attainable for some than it is for others. Like I'd argue for New York, that ceiling is a lot more attainable than it is for a team like Maryland. But regardless, all 4 of those teams, when they're playing the best lacrosse, they're playing, championship level lacrosse. And unfortunately, that's just not the same in the Western Conference. The Western Conference, you've got Denver and Utah, who I'd say is the same ceiling. Their ceiling is championship lacrosse. But then I'd say California, their ceiling's probably just, a conference finals appearance. And then Carolina, their ceiling is, making the playoffs, not being the odd man out of the Western Conference. So I don't know. We can get right into it. We'll talk about the Eastern Conference first. Like we said, it's kind of a shit show, honestly. Like it's so hard to predict, this conference when all these teams, when they're playing their best lacrosse, can beat each other. So it's a bit of a mess. But right now, obviously, the one that sticks out is Maryland. Maryland is 7th in the LaxRatsTV Week 5 power rankings. With the state of their team right now, with the youth, with them figuring out some of the unknowns, some of the question marks, where their pieces are going to be in this offense, mainly in this offense, but everywhere really, because you got goalie question as well. I think they're set up to have a better second half of the season than they had first half of the season. I could see this team going, 5-5, 6-4. You see the things that are exciting are, you do have youth all over the field, like really skilled youth with, a guy like Aiden Carroll who leads the league in 1-point goals. You've got TJ Malone, who's an MVP candidate, like a top 3 MVP candidate right now. Obviously, you got Ajax, one of the better cover guys in the league. You go on, you got guys like Brandow. There's youth all over the field. Even Levi, I think, is a 2nd-year guy now. There's youth all over the field is the bottom line. And youth that is going to be in the league for a while. All those guys I just named are not, barring any, God forbid injuries or, who knows, Levi might go play in the MSL next year like we saw Josh Byrne do this year. Barring anything crazy like that, like this is a team that's going to have a lot of the same faces for the next couple of years. I think they're building something that's pretty unreal. And their ceiling, when they're playing right and when they have their pieces in the right spots, they look really formidable. The problem is that they really haven't reached that yet this year. You can say that Carolina win, that 20-6 Carolina win, was that. It just, for some reason, that win just doesn't sit right for me. It feels like we should just wash it off because, Carolina looked like they didn't even look like a pro team that day. I don't know what was going on with them, but that game I almost want to just disregard in all, facets or whatever of it. But, regardless, I think there are question marks. There are definitely question marks. We talked about goalies. When you think of goalies, when you think of playoff lacrosse, you think of in hockey and lacrosse, like a hot goalie has the ability to win you big time games and to help you make runs. You think of, the NHL, I don't know, Stanley Cup playoffs, team with a better goalie wins a lot of the time. Having a hot goalie is a key component to winning a cup. So, and I think it's really similar in lacrosse. When was the last time you saw a national championship winning team that didn't have a stud goalie? Like, it just doesn't happen. Goalies are an extremely important part of the team. I'd argue that and Fogo are the two most important positions on the field, but they've got Fogo covered with Nards. All in all, we talked enough about Maryland. I think I really don't have any questions for this Boston team. You know what you're getting week in and week out from them. The only question I really have for New York is consistency. They're either the best or the worst. Last couple weeks have been good, though. Similar case with Philly, honestly, is consistency. This Maryland team just has a lot more questions than the other ones. The roster feels like it could be there. If it feels like they kind of did figure some stuff out in that Carolina win. However, not legitimate isn't the right word, but however, telling that you think that win is. There are just too many unknowns, too much dysfunction in this team to look at them in the same light as the other three Eastern Conference teams. Honestly, because of we've watched all these teams play, and because of how good all four of these Eastern Conference teams can play, I would not feel comfortable betting against any of these teams. But if I had to bet against one of them to miss the playoffs, it would probably be this Maryland team just because of the question marks. Many of them not solved quite yet. And then moving on to the Western Conference, you've got Denver, who's on the up, 0-2 start, and they have not looked back to 3-2 now. The McEnany insertion and the offensive development that we've seen in this squad has made them true contenders and arguably the best team in the league. I would not fault anyone for having them at number 1 in their power rankings right now. They're number 3 right now in the LaxRatsTV ones, just behind Boston, New York. They're a legit team. Utah, they're safe, honestly. Best defense in the league in every statistical category. I listened to, shout out Joe Keegan, he was on the Over the Head podcast this past week, and they discussed, they went through each team. When they talked about this Utah team, they talked about defense. They talked about how formidable and how consistent this defense has been this year. They've been absolutely outstanding. The way they're playing right now seems to be like their absolute floor, honestly, because their offense really has not helped them at all. Their offense hasn't helped them at all. Sisselberger has been in a bit of a slump recently. Even Dobson has been playing outstanding, but he hasn't been completely healthy with that ankle issue that we saw a couple weeks ago. So this feels like the floor of this Utah team, honestly. It feels like they're not going to get any worse than this. They really can only go up, which means they're going to make the playoffs, and they could easily make a run at it if they figure out some of their offensive and some of their face-off woes. But I think both those two teams, Denver and Utah, are relatively safe picks to make the playoffs. And then it comes down to California and Carolina. One of these two teams is going to be left out. If it were not for Blaze Reardon, if any human being on earth was playing in cage for Carolina, I would say that, 100% no easy, lock that they're not making the playoffs. But they do have Blaze Reardon in net. So it is a bit of a question because they're tough, really tough to predict. You saw them beat Boston last week because of Blaze, because of some crazy, unique offensive performances. That seemed a bit unexpected. Think about Surge, hitting 2 bombs, whatever. This team is they're a scary team. We talk about it every week. They're a scary team. They can win any game. They can lose every game. So it's a tough one to predict. But you look at California now too. California, they started off 2-0. They've came back to reality a little bit, losing 3 straight. But they still have this energy and this relentlessness, this drive that I feel like is unique for a PLL team. It feels like these guys, take it as seriously as anyone, care about it as much as anyone. And I think it's going to be a close race on making the playoffs between them and Carolina, but I think California is going to end up edging them out there. That's not even, once you add in, the score differential factor too, it should be California. It really should, because Carolina's score differential is -17, which is 16 goals worse than than California's, which is -1, I believe. With the current state of Carolina's offense, that score differential isn't going to budge much, honestly. they're going to end the year with the worst score differential. That's just, going to be an unfortunate reality for them, which means that they'd have to be a whole game. They'd have to have one whole win more than California to make the playoffs. Any ties there would go right to California because of the score differential. So, when you consider that as well, it feels like California should be able to win this one, and Carolina will be the odd man out of the Western Conference. So that would have Carolina being left out of the West, and Maryland being left out of the East. The other 6 teams obviously getting to play for the big one. Week 7 predictions. These games this week are in Chicago. There's no doubleheader, which means every team gets to play this weekend, and it's throwback weekend. So we get to see every team play, and we get some sick jerseys. So this should be a really fun weekend. There's actually some unreal matchups too. We'll start with game 1, game of the week. Undoubtedly, New York versus Boston. This is number 1 and 2 team in our power rankings from last week. So I think this is going to be an absolute battle, honestly. As much as it pains me to say, I think New York is going to win this one. And that hurts. That hurts for me to say as a Boston guy. But these teams met already. They met, round 1 was in Albany. Boston won that one 16-12, but, a lot of things have changed since then. The PLL things change every single week, as we've seen with the parity of the league. But I'll just read through a couple of changes from the first time that these teams met. Game 1 was an Atlas doubleheader. It was also the peak of Atlas's defensive struggles. Entenmann was below 50%. Right now he's 57%, over 57% on the season. Tucci had a 2-point goal. A face-off guy, 2-point goal is crazy. And then, we saw in San Diego how game-changing 2-pointers are. There were 2-pointers galore, which decided the fate of games. And honestly, 2-pointers are absolutely game-changing. And see if a face-off guy get a 2-point goal is absolutely crazy. And then if you just go team development, you slot in Mackesy for Manny, and this Cannons team looks pretty similar to their week 1 form. You really cannot say that with the Atlas. This Atlas team, if you blurred out all the jerseys and faces, uniforms, whatever, and watched this Atlas team in the last couple weeks versus this Atlas team in the first couple weeks of the season, you would not think they're the same team, honestly. So this Atlas team, I guess roster-wise, like you talk about their midfield changes, not many coaches would have the balls to sit a guy like Miles Jones. Give Presto the credit he deserves because he did. Miles it's a tough call to make. Miles is an absolute stud. He's one of the bigger names and faces in the sport of lacrosse, and he's an absolute stud, but it seems like he might not fit this offense right now. And for Pressler has the balls to sit him and a guy like, a vet like Kyle Jackson, for Bauer and the rookies that they have at the midfield. It completely changed the trajectory of their summer. And that change, along with them dialing it in defensively a little bit, this team looks completely different than they did in the beginning of the season. And honestly, I'm the conductor of the Atlas train right now. I'm riding that train. This team, they might be, when they're playing their best, they are the best team I've ever watched in the PLL. I think they're absolutely spectacular. I think, if they can play 75% to their ceiling, they're going to win the league. The one question has been consistency with them. But regardless, in this game, I think I have to pick the New York Atlas, as much as it pains me to do so. Game 2, Utah versus Philly. This is a super exciting one because you've got Utah's defense versus Philly's offense. It's going to be a cool matchup. My winner for this one is Philly, though. I think the Water Dogs are going to win this one. I think a lot of it comes down to this face-off matchup for me. You see a guy like Sisselberger, who has been in a slump this year. He statistically is the worst face-off specialist in the league right now. The ball's going to be in Philly's O-zone for a lot of the game, which goes back to this is a really exciting matchup, watching Philly's offense play against Utah's defense. We're going to get to see a lot of that 6-on-6 this game. Like we talked about before, we know Utah's defense is the best in the league. Undoubtedly. We've talked about that. That's established. They're going to have to be creative against the Water Dogs. what's exciting about this game, I think, is that Utah, the way they play defense, they're gonna throw the kitchen sink at Philly. You're gonna see them make Philly score in ways they're not comfortable. That's what great defenses do, and that's what Utah has been doing. They're gonna, whatever they do, whether they double pull the midfield, short stick Taylor, they're gonna mess around with the poles to give Sowers, not let Sowers have his ideal pick matchups. They're gonna make guys pick for Sowers that aren't the best pickers on the team. See if that can mess with them. That flips back onto Philly, because I feel like a lot of the talk around Philly's offense, particularly last year when they were struggling a bit, and then into this year when they've been great at times and they've been a little inconsistent, is can they be multiple? Can they be multiple as an offense? Can they be diverse? You have obviously Coach T is an absolute legend. Obviously won the 6 Princeton Natties, so I absolutely love the guy. But you see, what can he do to help this offense not be one-dimensional? When you have Sowers, who's willing to do anything to win for this team. Yeah, this offense has so many. This offense should be ridiculously good if they just can diversify a little bit. The question is, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if they do that, I think they're going to win this game. If they don't, I think Utah's going to be able to frustrate them offensively. So I think it's obviously come down to this 6-on-6 matchup. It's gonna, if Stathakis can do what he should do and keep Sisselberger in the 30 to 40% face-off range, and then Dobson, obviously he's been a little banged up, but regardless, no matter what his state is, he's been playing great. This game's going to come down to the 6-on-6 matchup. I think it's going to be, can Philly find ways to be multiple where they can include, Hannah and Kelly, let them initiate offense as well as Sowers. I think that'll complement that. If they can get the defense focusing on the middies as much as they focus on Sowers, that's when this team is at their best, is what I'm trying to say. And if they can do that, I think they'll win. If they can't, I think they're going to lose. It's total heavyweight battle. You also, this game is really exciting because you also have the question of, is Kirst going to make his debut this week? I've heard so many different things. I have no idea. Honestly, this game, I'm picking Philly off of a gut feeling. I think this offense is going to put it together. I love the way Stathakis has been playing. So I just feel confident in this Philly team right now. And, though I love Utah, I don't feel as confident in them right now. Wow, that was a mess. That was a thought splurge all over the place right there. I don't even know what I just said. But Philly's winning that one, I think. Game 3, Carolina versus California. My pick here is Carolina. This is a phenomenal matchup for Carolina, it feels like. They're playing a team with, in California, there's a lot of one-on-one dodging. They take a lot of the tougher shots. The team like we used to see Denver take when they were struggling a little bit. They take a lot of those kind of shots. And we saw Blaze eat up against Denver back then, and I think Blaze is going to eat up in this game. The question, obviously the question for this Chaos team is the offense. The biggest question, honestly, to me, is Knobloch. He's not on the PLL injury report this week. That isn't always perfectly reliable, especially this early in the week. It's Monday right now, so who knows? But that's a huge gain if he's back, and it's an equally massive loss if he can't come back, because he's their party starter. He's the spark plug, the kickstart of this offense. Him being able to put pressure on the defense is gonna open up the Hiltz backside dodging that he made a living on at Cuse. So I hope if Knobloch is back, playing at a level that we should expect from him and not suffering through an injury, I think this is definitely a Chaos win. Even if he's not back, I think that they're this Carolina defense with Blaze in net is going to be able to do enough against this California team to frustrate them and get the win. Game 4, Denver versus Maryland. I'm not overthinking this one. Denver, Denver, everyone's been riding the Denver train recently, and I am definitely hopped on that train as well. It's honestly as simple as I think Denver has a case to be the best team in the league. Could definitely jump to number one depending on how things play out this upcoming week. Against the Maryland team, like we talked plenty about them earlier, like a lot of questions still to be answered. A lot of pieces that are being moved around. Like we'll see where they fall and if they fall in the right place. Maryland, if Maryland's humming, like they're going to give Denver a run for their money. This is going to be a great game. But if they're not, Denver's going to win this one for sure. So Denver's my pick in that one. All right, last up, we're going to wrap it up with Rabil and Carcaterra's State of the League. Tons of exciting things came out of that. Honestly, you guys should definitely give it a watch if you haven't already. Just, honestly, these State of Leagues are so fun for me to watch just to, play around with the thought of lacrosse 10, 20, 30 years from now, whatever it is. And, the state of the PLL and then, specifically, but then as lacrosse in a whole, or as a whole. They started out, they talked a good amount about the Champ Series and about sixes, and the way Rabil described it was exactly what I think most of us thought it was in the creation of it, just as, this a much simpler way to articulate lacrosse, to a casual sports fan, and Rabil said it was a big, them changing the way they play to that sixes format was a big reason why they could get into the Olympics. Ultimately, it's a much simpler way of playing lacrosse. With the out of bounds is a change of possession, a goal is a change of possession. You don't have to deal with that subbing and subbing every possession and offside stuff. It's really just you can kind of point at it and just be like, it's basketball but lacrosse sticks, right? And that's, though it's frustrating that there's now 3 different forms of lacrosse, it makes sense that they did do that. I hope it ends up in the future can just be normal lacrosse, but who knows? We'll see where that goes. What is a concern though is what exactly does that mean for the future of lacrosse? If you look at lacrosse 30 years from now, it might look a lot different than lacrosse as we know it today. In LA 28, they're going to be playing sixes in front of millions of people. So the way I think about it is, if lacrosse is a market, and you say field lacrosse owns 70% of the market and box lacrosse owns 30% of the market, something like that, or whatever, 60-40, 70-30, something like that. You then add in sixes that owns now, whatever it is, 1% of the lacrosse market. If that is the product that's being pushed out to casual sports fans and to most people around the world, is there a future where that 1% market share that sixes holds becomes 20%, 30%, 40%, above 50%? Does it become the dominant form of lacrosse as, it develops around the world? Who knows? It's a concern, but it's also exciting. Every sport, develops as it grows. So who knows exactly what that means, but it's just an interesting thing to think about if that could, overtake some of the, more traditional forms of lacrosse that we see today. Who knows? But we'll move on. Growth. Rabil talked a lot about growth, growing pains. This is the most exciting part is when, Rabil talks about how he wants to see lacrosse unfold in the coming years. For any LaxRat, you want to see the league become like Rabil talked about the UFC and the MLS being goals, being examples set for a league like the PLL, which is super exciting to see because you see those two leagues that players or fighters are making six figures, $1 million, selling out arenas. MLS sells out some of their markets in the stadiums they play in. It's exciting to see Rabil think about the league's growth. He said that he wants it to be like the UFC, like the MLS, but even faster. So, obviously, I think no one's patient enough to want to wait a while to see the PLL selling out stadiums and, paying their players six figures. But you know, hopefully it comes as soon as possible. You know, in this, you know, question, Rabil talked about NLL partnership, which would be massive for the sport. You see, like, I think it was really nice when we talked about a couple weeks ago. We talked about the PLL moving out of. I think it was the PLL made their season start a little later, or maybe it was the NLL season started a little earlier, just so that they wouldn't overlap anymore with playoffs, which was absolutely fantastic. Like a long-term partnership between these two leagues would be so essential for the growth of lacrosse, because box lacrosse and field lacrosse they're both lacrosse. You know, those fall under the umbrella of lacrosse. They're both beautiful. They're both beautiful sports in their own right, and I think any you know LaxRat, any lacrosse fan loves both of them. You know, as I do. I want to watch both of them grow. I want to watch both of them, you know, become big time sports. So he then moved on, talked about expansion. He talked about, you know, his goals for the league, players living in market, practicing every day. But then he also talked about leaning more into the spring season and the fall season, which is fascinating because I think it was either a week or two ago on this podcast where I criticized moving the season really out of the summer. But the more I think about it, the more I like the idea of moving the season more into the spring. You know, this is where the NLL partnership becomes even more important. If you can get the NLL to start, you know, I think training camps in November now, games start end of November, beginning of December. If you move that a month earlier, all of a sudden they're, you know, say NLL Finals Game 3 goes to the end of April rather than the end of May. Then you have the PLL can move up a month, and then they don't have to compete with the NFL at the end of the season, which is so frustrating for everyone out there. I'm really starting to get into that lean into the spring thing, honestly. It really doesn't mind me it intermingling with college lacrosse either, because you see every other sport does that. Like college football does that, and it works just fine. College hockey does that, and it works just fine. College basketball does that, and it works just fine. There's not much. I don't have any real worries about that, honestly. The season also starts it'll be cool to see the rookies get slow launched into the season as they losing their college seasons, and a week or two later start playing in the PLL. But I'm starting to really love that idea of playing more in the spring, less in the fall. You know, Rabil talked about it more as like the pinnacle of lacrosse is spring. He was just like, lacrosse is associated with spring. Fans are at their peak lacrosse interest in the spring. The media is at their peak lacrosse interest in spring, so it's essential to have it in the spring, which I definitely think makes sense as well. But I think the stuff I talked about, with the NLL and with the college, it makes it, make even more sense. Rabil talked about, so we're 7 years in now to the PLL. He said 7 years from now, so I think that'd be 2032. The goals from now to then, the PLL in 2032, as per Paul Rabil, will have 12 teams with their own owners playing in markets where stadiums are either owned by the team's owner or partnered with the owners of the stadium. They're playing in the spring. Wages are 3x to 4x what they are now. There's an NLL partnership, and games are sold out, and millions are watching on TV. I mean, if that doesn't get you fired up, I don't know what does. That's so exciting to see. I think everyone obviously would want to see something like that. How realistic are a lot of these 12 teams that'd be 4 teams added in 7 years. I mean, maybe it is realistic if the league can continue to grow as it has. But I don't know. I mean, none of that sounds too crazy. There's no way they obviously get all those goals, but I mean, man, if you just knock out a couple, 2 or 3 of those goals, the league's in a way better place than it is now. Just say you get they start playing in the spring, wages go up 3x. At the low end, there's 10 teams with owners. A couple games get sold out every year. That's a massive win for the growth of lacrosse, for the league, for lacrosse fans. That would be unbelievably exciting. Something that I thought of from that talking about, the partnership, the potential part of a partnership between the PLL and NLL. This is like a LaxRatsTV future prediction, seeing the future. I'm seeing a PLL NLL merger. I'm seeing franchises have an indoor team and an outdoor team that play in different seasons. That would just be so freaking cool to see happen. I don't know, that's probably like decades down the line, but regardless, if you haven't listened to that State of the League, you really should, because it's exciting. It's a lot of exciting stuff, and it's cool to just see the goals for the growth of the league from Paul, who's obviously done so much for the game. And one takeaway I had from it is you get caught up in all these things. You get caught up in the occasional NLL team folding. You get caught up in if you go on Twitter, you'd think lacrosse is, you'd think the future of pro lacrosse is absolutely fucked. So, despite what you'll see on Twitter, despite what you may think when the occasional bad news about a TV viewership or a franchise folding, despite all of that, I think after watching that, the league feels like it's in good hands. And I think the future of lacrosse is bright. So that was State of Lacrosse episode 3. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll get back at you with some pick'ems for this weekend from some of the guys. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys soon.